Oh, hey buddy, it's your old pal Scott, and this is Let's Talk Tabletop. Being that I'm an independent creator of a skirmish war game called Brutality Skirmish War Game and Brutal Space and some upcoming ones in the future, I have a lot of well-intended people, good-hearted people willing to help, and they go, "Hey Scott, can we playtest for you? If you need playtesters, let me know." And I believe that they have only the best of intentions at heart. Unfortunately, I always tell them no. Here's why. Some of you may laugh at this, but game design is very scientific. It really does use a lot of the scientific method, testing theories and things like that, and it needs to be in a clinical setting, or at least that's how I do it. And you need to make sure that your vision for your game, or even your novel, or your movie, or anything else that you're going to get someone's input on, this applies to a lot of different things, but specifically I'm talking about gaming, um, getting people's opinions is only so good. And what I mean is, while you're developing your game, you need to be trying to make it the very best you can and in line with the vision for what you want. Unfortunately, in the early stages of the game, people are going to come in and they're going to give you differing viewpoints. And normally you'd think that's great, right? Oh, differing viewpoints, that's great. Well, actually, it just muddies the water. While you're trying to crystallize your actual opinion or your vibe that you're going with, you really can't have other people muddying the waters like that, going, "Oh, well, I think this is too powerful," or "I think," because they don't have the full picture that's inside your head. And as well-meaning as they may be, there is a time for playtesting at the very end of the development of your game. Can you believe that? I mean, I know it's hard to believe, but it actually happens at the very end of your game. In the early stages of your game, if you get random people's input that isn't extremely controlled in a controlled environment, just like an experiment, you're going to get people muddying the waters with their opinions that they don't have all of the information. They don't know everything that's inside your head. They don't know the whole goal of the game, that sort of thing. So you should be playtesting nonstop, every day, all the time. You should be playtesting constantly. And if you have a couple friends participate in it, well, that's awesome, okay? Getting other people's opinions that way is okay. But I'm talking about people that are just going to be separately playtesting your game in the first 3/4 of your game development. That's really not very helpful. And the problem is, they will say something's overpowered, right? Well, they may have only played one game with it, and they may not have even played the rules necessarily. And they may have not put down enough terrain that you want on the board, or they may have done any number of things, got some rules wrong or whatever. And then if you take that to heart and you go, "Oh, wow, this is too powerful," and you go change it, later on you're probably going to realize that that wasn't exactly true. You probably overcompensate for whatever the minor issue might be. So the best thing to do while you are developing a game is to maybe have a couple local friends that will play you, and if not, just play by yourself and try things very scientifically. For instance, when I was developing Brutality 5 years ago, I wanted to make sure all the different classes, range, support, fast, and melee, were all balanced with each other. So I thought, well, let me do the extremes, and if I can balance the extremes, then everything in the middle will kind of fall in line, right? So I would do a list of all melee versus a list of all support and fight and see what happens. I might even fight that same battle half a dozen times to make sure it wasn't just the dice rolls or whatever. Then I would do, okay, well, I tweaked some things, that was balanced. Okay, so now let's do melee versus fast, or let's do fast versus range. And I would cycle through all those things ultimately dozens of times in a very clinical setting, the same terrain, the same whatever. And then if I had some really wacky dice rolls, then I would just cut them out completely and just treat them as like a normal hit versus a critical hit or whatever. And that's how you scientifically test a game. Unfortunately, the people that are offering to playtest for you have, once again, every good intention in mind, and they're truly trying to help, and they probably like your game, or they like you, and that's definitely a compliment. I'm always super flattered if someone offers to help playtest any one of my games while they're in development. But being that it's an uncontrolled environment and I don't know all of the variables in there, the information's kind of not very good, right? And for instance, like if you were doing an actual scientific experiment, right, a poll or whatever, and you had other people go out and do portions of your poll, but they didn't follow the same guidelines you did, then you really couldn't publish that information because they're not all clinically the exact same. Then what you should do when it's time to actually have random people play test is make sure that your game is what you would consider finished. It's completely finished, even though secretly you know it's not finished completely. But then that's the time. Once it's a finished publishable product, that's the time to start getting random people's input. Now, I'm fortunate enough that I have a very large gamer base in my area as far as people willing to play Brutality. I probably have a dozen of my friends that will play Brutality. They'll play it at home, they'll play solo, they'll whatever. They'll read through the rules ahead of time and all of that. I'm very fortunate for that. So I still have a little bit of control with that. I could even say, hey, David, could you play this way, and take this artifact or whatever. And I really could do that. You may or may not be able to do that with random people online, but at that point, it is actually very helpful to get people's opinions once you consider it a completely finished game. But I know a lot of people will probably scoff at the idea that game design, oh, my little toy miniature game, that's going to be scientific, but it's incredibly scientific. If you want to do it correctly, it's incredibly scientific. It has to be averaged out. It has to be in a sealed setting so that it's not contaminated with other people's thoughts or the way they lay out their board, or maybe they got one set of dice that rolls super high or something of that nature. You want to make sure it's as averaged and as balanced as possible. And basically, you want to boil it down to a pretty average game. And that's why I play multiple versions of the game. My new supplement coming out, which is called Brutal Epic, it's Kaiju, Superheroes, and Monsters. It's an adaptation of the Brutality rules. I've been playing that for the last year. And I just started working on it like 2 months ago, actually working on that supplement. But I've been playtesting on and off this whole time, thinking about it, and what if I did this, and what if I did that, and that's all me privately, because I can be in the lab here. I wish I had a lab coat. I can be in the lab here and actually know exactly what's going on, versus getting some very well-meaning person's opinion and not knowing how effective is that? Like, they don't know all the information, so how can I really bank on any of that information? And ultimately, they're going to waste their time doing it, and they're going to play it and then give you feedback, if they do it at all. A lot of people, I know a lot of people in life are pretty flaky, right? I know that from my convention and other stuff. People say they'll do something, and then they don't, and then they don't show up, or whatever. So I like to rely just on myself until it's completely finished, and then that's the time for some balance tweaks, because someone then, if they make their table differently than yours, well, you may want to change your rules to kind of fudge that a little bit and average it out. Then you may want to change list building because they found this real bad bug or this real bad cheesy thing that you can do in the list building, or whatever. And it definitely is helpful to have playtesters. And they are the nicest people in the world if they're willing to do that for you. But being that it's not a controlled setting, it's only so helpful. And matter of fact, if anything, it's going to make you less sure of what you're trying to do with your game. And it's not complete information. So to all of those dozens and dozens of people that have offered to playtest for me over the years, I thank you so much. Unfortunately, the information probably wouldn't have been super helpful because I don't even know the variables that are missing or extra variables added in the equation of your playtest. You always have to take everyone's feedback with a grain of salt. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, share, comment, whatever. And what is your experience with feedback and playtesting? And do you agree with me or do you disagree with me?